Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it for you? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy realistic horror stories like these, consider subscribing. Now, let's get into it. Story 1. The house. That wasn't on the map. 1:32 a.m. My phone buzzed against the cup holder just as I was turning off Main Street. At the exact same moment, the GPS voice said, "You have arrived," even though I was still surrounded by gas stations and closed storefronts. The app showed a rural delivery address nearly 15 miles outside the city. Somehow, it thought I was already there. I sat at the red light and stared at the screen. The order had come through a minute earlier. 1 burger combo, fries, and a drink. Standard late-night stuff. The name on the order just said M. What bothered me wasn't the food. It was the map. The route line stretched far out past the edge of town, into the darker area where the street grid faded into long county roads. But the GPS marker, the little blue arrow that represented me, was already blinking directly on top of the delivery point. Like I was there, even though I clearly wasn't. I refreshed the app. The route recalculated, and this time it behaved normally. The marker snapped back to my location, and the directions appeared again. 16 minutes. I figured it was just a glitch. Delivery apps do that sometimes, especially late at night when the signal gets weird. So I followed the directions. Within 5 minutes, the city lights started thinning out. The road narrowed and the street lights disappeared one by one. The GPS guided me onto a 2-lane road I'd never driven before, even though I'd been doing food delivery for almost 2 years. The address kept counting down. 9 minutes, 7 minutes, 5 minutes. The farther I drove, the darker it got. Not the normal kind of rural darkness either. It felt dense, like the headlights weren't reaching as far as they should. There were no houses, no mailboxes, just trees and long stretches of empty roadside. I checked the app again. Still the same order, same address. But the customer name had changed. The M was gone. The name field was blank. I slowed down a little. Sometimes people edit delivery notes mid-order, but I'd never seen the name disappear completely. The GPS told me to turn right. The road it pointed to barely looked like a road at all, more like a narrow gravel lane cutting through the trees. I hesitated for a second, then turned anyway. The moment my tires hit the gravel, my phone signal dropped from 3 bars to 1. The lane stretched forward maybe half a mile before the trees opened up. And that's where the house was. It sat alone at the end of the road, a small wooden place with a wide porch and no visible lights. The paint was faded enough that I couldn't tell what color it used to be. It looked empty. Not recently empty. The kind of empty where nobody had lived there for a long time. But my app still said, "You've arrived." I parked near the edge of the driveway and shut off the engine. Without the engine noise, the silence out there felt unusually thick. No insects, no wind, just quiet. I grabbed the delivery bag and walked up the short path to the porch. The boards creaked under my shoes. And that's when I noticed the other bags. At first, I thought they were trash. But when I got closer, I realized what they actually were. Old delivery bags. At least 5 of them. Different restaurants, different logos. Some looked like they'd been there for hours. One looked like it had been there for days. I stopped halfway up the porch steps. Every bag was placed neatly beside the door, like someone had been leaving food there all night. I checked the address again. Still correct. Still the same house. The delivery instructions updated. Not a notification, just a quiet change in the text field. Leave it and go. That was it. No name, no other instructions. Just that sentence. I set the food next to the other bags. The moment I did, I felt something shift in the air around me. Not a sound exactly, more like the subtle awareness that you're not alone. I looked up at the house. That's when I saw the camera, mounted just above the door frame, pointed directly at my face. The little red light on it was blinking, recording. I stepped back instinctively, and out of the corner of my eye I noticed movement in one of the windows. A curtain on the far side of the porch moved slightly. Just a small shift, like someone standing behind it had leaned closer. I waited. Nothing else moved. The curtain went still again. I took out my phone and marked the order as delivered. But when the confirmation screen appeared, something else changed. The customer section was gone completely. No name, no profile, just the address. For a second, I considered knocking, but the silence of that place made the idea feel wrong. So I walked back to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I checked the rearview mirror. The porch was still visible through the trees. All the delivery bags sat exactly where they were, except for one. The one I had just placed down. It was gone. I stopped the car, looked again. The spot where I'd left the bag was empty. The other ones were still there, just not mine. I didn't go back. I turned the car around and drove back down the gravel road. About 2 minutes later, my phone signal returned. The app refreshed automatically, and the map appeared again. But something about it didn't make sense. The blue arrow showing my location wasn't out in the countryside anymore. It was sitting right in the middle of the city, on Main Street, exactly where I'd been when the order first came in. The route history showed a straight line from the restaurant to the delivery point. No long rural road, no gravel lane, no 15-minute drive. According to the GPS log, I had never left town. I pulled over and zoomed in on the address. The street name still existed, but when I tapped the location marker, the map zoomed out and displayed a message I had never seen before. Location not found. I searched the address again, manually. Nothing. No road, no house, no record of it anywhere on the map. And when I checked my delivery history in the app, that order wasn't there anymore either. Story 2. The delivery that was already opened 12:06 a.m. The kitchen clock above the prep station clicked over to the next minute, just as the order printer spat out one last ticket. At the same time, my phone buzzed with the delivery notification. The strange part was that the pizza listed on the ticket had already been sitting in the warmer for almost 10 minutes. I remember staring at the label on the box. Apartment 3B. The receipt taped to the lid showed the exact same order number that had just printed from the machine. But nobody in the kitchen remembered making a second pizza. It was the end of my shift. The store was already half closed. Chairs were stacked on tables and the lights over the dining area were off. I picked up the box and checked the order screen behind the counter. Only one delivery was listed. Apartment 3B, one large pepperoni. Nothing unusual. The only thing that bothered me was the timestamp. According to the receipt, the pizza had been made at 11:54 p.m., but the printer had only just produced the ticket at 12:06. I asked the cook if he had made this earlier by mistake. He shook his head. If it was made, it was in the system, he said, and that order just came through. I didn't argue. Late-night shifts get messy sometimes, so I grabbed the delivery bag and headed out. The apartment complex was about 7 minutes away. It was one of those quiet places built in the 80s, 2-story buildings, long exterior hallways, and dim yellow lights that never seemed bright enough. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the place looked half asleep. A few windows were glowing with TV light. Most of the building was dark. I checked the receipt again. Building C, apartment 3B. The hallway smelled faintly like old carpet and cleaning solution. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward the door. 3B was near the end of the corridor. The door itself looked normal. Plain brown paint, small number plate, deadbolt lock. I knocked twice. The sound carried down the hallway. No response. I waited about 20 seconds and knocked again. Still nothing. I checked the delivery instructions in the app. Leave at door. That was pretty common. So I set the pizza box on the floor just beside the door frame. Before leaving, I did what I usually do. I snapped the photo for proof of delivery. The hallway lights flickered slightly when the camera flashed. Then I turned and started walking back toward the stairs. I had taken maybe 6 or 7 steps when something made me stop. A soft cardboard sound, not loud, just the quick flip of a lid opening. I turned around. The pizza box was open. The lid was folded all the way back. For a second I thought maybe I had left it that way, but I remembered clearly closing it after checking the receipt earlier. And when I looked closer, something else didn't make sense. 2 slices were missing. Not messy, not scattered, just gone. Like someone had taken them neatly out of the box. The door to apartment 3B hadn't moved, still closed, still locked. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, trying to listen for movement inside. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just the low hum of the hallway lights. I walked back toward the door. The pizza box was still sitting exactly where I left it. Open, steam rising faintly from the remaining slices. I knocked again, louder this time. Delivery. My voice echoed down the hallway. No answer. I tried the handle just to see if maybe someone had stepped away and forgotten to latch it. The handle didn't move. The door was locked. I stepped back slowly and looked down the hallway both directions. Empty. Every door closed. Every hallway light buzzing softly overhead. I pulled out my phone and opened the delivery app. That's when the message came through. A new notification appeared under the order. Customer message. You forgot the second order. I stared at the screen. Second order? I checked the receipt again. 1 pizza. That's all I picked up. I even reopened the order details just to be sure. 1 large pepperoni. No drinks, no sides, no second item. I typed back. I only received 1 pizza from the store. The message sent. No reply came. I looked back toward the door. The pizza box was gone. Completely gone. The floor where it had been sitting was empty. I walked over slowly. The door to 3B hadn't opened. The deadbolt was still locked in place. No sound from inside. No footsteps in the hallway. Just the same low electric buzz from the lights. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide if maybe someone from another apartment had grabbed it as a joke. But the hallway was too quiet. And the timing didn't make sense. The box had disappeared in less than 30 seconds. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the customer. But this one looked different. Instead of a name, the sender field just showed the apartment number. 3B. The message read, "Next time, bring both." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear exactly. More like the slow realization that something about the order had never been right. I backed away from the door and headed toward the stairs. As I reached the middle of the hallway, the lights behind me shut off. One by one. Not suddenly, slowly, like someone flipping switches in sequence. The light above 3B went dark first, then the one beside it, then the next, each one turning off just after I passed beneath it. By the time I reached the stairwell, only 1 light remained on. The one directly above the apartment door. I didn't stop walking. I went straight to my car. Once inside, I refreshed the delivery app. The order screen was blank. No address, no receipt, no delivery record. Just the main dashboard like nothing had happened. I drove back to the store. The cook was finishing cleanup when I walked in. I asked him to check the order system. He scrolled through the last hour of tickets. There was nothing for apartment 3B. No pepperoni pizza. No delivery order at midnight. He looked up at me like I was joking. "We didn't send you anywhere," he said. And when I checked the photo gallery on my phone later that night, the delivery picture I had taken in the hallway wasn't there either, but something had clearly opened that pizza. Story 3. The customer who was still watching 2:03 a.m. My phone buzzed against the dashboard just as I turned onto Maple Avenue, and the delivery app announced a new grocery order. At the exact same moment, the rearview mirror caught headlights pulling into the street behind me. Slow, steady, like they had been waiting for me to pass. The order instructions were short. Do not knock. Leave the bags by the garage. I accepted it without thinking much about it. Late-night grocery deliveries were common in that area. People forgot things, ran out of milk, random stuff like that. The pickup was already prepared at a 24-hour market a few blocks away. 2 brown grocery bags, nothing heavy. A carton of eggs, bread, a gallon of milk. Basic things. The address was in a quiet suburban neighborhood about 10 minutes from the store. The kind of place where everything looks the same at night. Wide streets, neatly spaced houses, no sidewalks, just long driveways and trimmed lawns disappearing into the dark. By the time I turned onto the customer street, most of the neighborhood lights were off. Only a few porch lamps were still on, glowing dim and yellow through the trees. The house I was delivering to sat near the end of the block. 2 stories, detached garage, no lights anywhere, not even inside. The entire place looked completely dark. I slowed the car as the GPS voice quietly said, "You have arrived." That's when I noticed the other car. It was parked along the curb about 2 houses down from the driveway. The engine was running, headlights off. But someone was sitting in the driver's seat. I could see the outline of their head through the windshield. They weren't looking at the road. They were looking at me. I pulled into the driveway anyway. It didn't feel threatening exactly. People sit in cars at night sometimes, checking their phones, waiting for someone inside. Still, I was aware of it. The way their head didn't move, just facing the driveway, watching. I grabbed the grocery bags and stepped out of the car. The air outside felt colder than it had a few minutes earlier. That quiet, suburban kind of silence. No traffic, no distant music, just the faint hum of someone's air conditioner somewhere down the street. The garage was attached to the house on the left side, exactly where the instructions said to leave the bags. As I walked across the driveway, I glanced toward the parked car again. The person inside hadn't moved. Same position, same stillness, just watching. I set the grocery bags down beside the garage door. The concrete felt cold through the soles of my shoes. Normally, when I deliver at night, I hear something from inside the house. TV noise, footsteps, someone moving near the door. But this place was silent, completely silent. No light behind the windows, no sound inside the garage, just the faint clicking of the engine cooling in my car behind me. I took out my phone and opened the delivery app to take the confirmation photo. The camera flash lit up the driveway for half a second, bright enough that I could see the reflection of the parked car's windshield at the end of the street, and the silhouette inside it, still facing me, still watching. The photo uploaded. The app paused for a moment while processing the delivery. Then a message notification appeared. Customer message. Thanks for bringing them this late. That was normal enough, except for one detail. The message icon showed the customer location inside the house, not near the street, not near the parked car, inside the house. I looked up at the windows again. Every one of them was dark. No light, no movement. I checked the parked car again. The person was still sitting there, still facing the driveway. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, just long enough for the situation to start feeling slightly off. Then I turned and walked back toward my vehicle. The gravel at the edge of the driveway crunched softly under my shoes. When I opened the car door and sat down, the interior suddenly felt warmer than outside. I started the engine. The headlights came on, lighting up the street ahead. And that's when the parked car moved. Not quickly, just a slow roll forward from the curb. The car eased away from its spot and began driving down the street, in the same direction I was about to go. I sat there for a moment, watching it. It wasn't speeding. It wasn't trying to hide anything, just moving slowly through the neighborhood. I pulled out of the driveway and followed the road toward the main street. The other car stayed about half a block ahead, same steady speed, same distance. After 2 turns, I realized something. They weren't leaving the neighborhood. They were matching my route. Every time I turned, they turned. Not immediately, but close enough, like they were keeping track of me. I told myself it was coincidence. Suburban neighborhoods have limited exits. Everyone eventually funnels onto the same road. But the farther we drove, the quieter the streets became, and the fewer houses there were. Eventually, the road opened into a wider 2-lane street that led back toward the city. The other car slowed slightly. I could see the shape of the driver's head through the back window. Still facing forward, still moving at that same controlled speed. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the delivery app. Same customer. Everything arrived perfectly. I glanced at the notification, then back at the car ahead of me. Because something about the timing didn't make sense. If the message came from inside the house, then who had been sitting in that car watching me unload the groceries? The road ahead reached an intersection with a red light. The car in front of me stopped. I stopped behind it. For the first time since leaving the driveway, the driver moved. Slowly. Their head turned slightly toward the rearview mirror. Toward me. I couldn't see their face clearly. Just the dark outline of someone looking back. Then the light turned green. The car drove forward. Instead of continuing toward the highway, it turned right, toward the industrial district, a place where most of the delivery drivers work at night. Warehouses, storage buildings, late-night restaurants, the areas where drivers wait between orders. I didn't follow. I kept going straight toward the city. But as I drove, something about the order kept bothering me. Not the message, not the watching, the address. So when I reached the next stoplight, I opened the delivery history in the app. The order was still there, still marked as completed, still showing the same suburban address. But the map preview looked slightly different now. The location pin had moved, not to another house, not to another street. It was sitting directly on top of a wide, empty parking lot in the industrial district, right where most of the delivery drivers wait at night. The exact place where I usually park between orders. I zoomed in on the map. The pin stayed there, right in the center of the lot. And for the first time that night, I understood what had actually happened. The delivery address hadn't been random. The groceries weren't the point. Someone had just needed a reason to get me to show up somewhere, to see which car I drove, to watch me, to follow the same route I take every night. And now they knew exactly where to find me. Story 1. The restricted building that wasn't on the base map. At 2:17 a.m., the fluorescent lights inside the abandoned concrete building at the far end of the base suddenly turned on. I remember because I had just checked the maintenance log on my tablet and was about to head back to the utility shed. That building wasn't supposed to have power. The electrical lines had been cut years earlier, at least according to the infrastructure map we used for night repairs. But the windows were glowing, not flickering, not dim, just on. For a few seconds, I assumed someone from engineering must have restored the circuit. Maybe a late project I hadn't been told about. Still, it bothered me enough that I pulled up the base map again. The building wasn't there. I zoomed in twice, thinking maybe the file hadn't loaded properly. Every hangar, storage unit, generator shed, and training structure was labeled. But the concrete block sitting about 300 yards past the motor pool simply didn't exist on the map. I had noticed it before during daytime shifts, a square, windowed structure surrounded by faded yellow caution posts. Most people assumed it was some leftover Cold War facility. Nobody talked about it, nobody went near it, and it definitely wasn't supposed to have electricity. I stood there for a moment in the quiet. Night maintenance duty was usually dead calm. You'd hear distant generators humming, sometimes trucks moving across the motor pool, but otherwise the base slept pretty heavily. Tonight was completely still, except for that building. The windows were glowing a pale office light white, like the kind from old ceiling panels. No movement inside, just light filling the rooms. I told myself it was probably nothing. Still, routine was routine. If a structure suddenly had power restored, maintenance usually logged it. Mine didn't. So I started walking. The ground between the motor pool and the building was mostly gravel and packed dirt. Floodlights from the main base perimeter barely reached that far, leaving the area dim and shadowy. As I got closer, I could see the windows more clearly. They weren't dirty like I expected. They were clean, like someone had wiped them recently. That was the first detail that made me slow down. The second was the door. The heavy steel door facing the base road was slightly open. Not wide, maybe 3 inches. Just enough to notice. I stopped about 20 feet away. The air felt colder there for some reason. Not freezing, just noticeably cooler than the rest of the base. I remember thinking, maybe security's inside. Maybe they'd converted the place into some kind of temporary operations room. But that didn't explain why it wasn't on the map, or why nobody mentioned it. I stepped closer. Gravel crunched under my boots, loud in the silence. That's when the door moved. Not much, just a slow shift inward, like someone inside had nudged it open a little more. I froze. I hadn't knocked. I hadn't called out. And I was still at least 15 feet away. The door stopped moving. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps inside. Slow ones, measured, walking toward the entrance. My brain immediately tried to rationalize it. Probably a night officer working late. Maybe someone from intelligence or base command using the building unofficially. Still, something about the situation felt wrong. Because if someone was working inside, the building would have been listed somewhere, and someone would have told maintenance. The footsteps stopped right on the other side of the door. I waited. No voice, no greeting, just silence. Then the door opened another inch, not wide enough to see inside, but enough that whoever was standing there could definitely see me. I finally spoke. Maintenance. My voice sounded louder than I expected in the quiet. Just checking the electrical feed. No response. I waited another few seconds. Still nothing. Then something happened that I still think about sometimes. Inside the building, a second set of footsteps started moving. Not near the door. Further back, walking down what sounded like a hallway, which meant there were at least 2 people inside. The person near the door hadn't moved, hadn't said anything, just stood there, watching. I took 1 step closer. That's when the door slowly shut. Not slammed, not rushed, just a calm, steady motion until it clicked closed. And right as the latch caught, the lights inside the building went out, every single one. The windows went dark instantly. The entire structure dropped into complete blackness. I stood there for a moment, waiting for the lights to flick back on. They didn't. No footsteps, no voices, just silence again. I walked up to the door and tried the handle. Locked. I knocked once. Nothing. The building looked exactly the way it always had. Dark, empty, abandoned. Like the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. I went back to the maintenance shed and checked the electrical grid again. The lines feeding that building had been permanently disconnected. Years ago. There was no physical way electricity could have reached it. The next morning, I mentioned the incident to a senior technician. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask questions either. He just told me something that stuck with me. He said the building used to appear on older base maps. Then one year, it didn't anymore. No explanation. No demolition record. No official removal. Just gone from the documents. I asked who used it now. He shrugged. Not us. A few weeks later, I walked past that same area during daylight. The building was still there. Same windows, same door, same faded caution posts. But something about it bothered me. The gravel path leading to the entrance had been freshly disturbed, like someone had been walking in and out recently, and the windows were still perfectly clean. I never saw the lights turn on again after that night. But even now, years later, the part that still bothers me isn't the lights or the footsteps. It's the moment the door started opening, because I hadn't made a sound yet, which means whoever was inside that building already knew I was standing there. Story 2: The Night Watchtower That Kept Reporting Movement. At 1:43 a.m., the motion sensor alarm went off for the third night in a row. Same location, same exact time. And once again, when I pulled up the camera feed from the perimeter fence, there was nothing there, just wind moving through dry grass beyond the wire. I leaned back in the chair inside the watchtower and stared at the screen for a moment. The tower overlooked the northern boundary of the base, about half a mile from the main gate. It wasn't a busy post. Most nights you watched cameras, logged patrol vehicles, and waited for sunrise. The sensor field outside the fence covered a stretch of desert about 200 yards wide. Pressure sensors, motion detectors, thermal cameras. It was designed so nothing could cross that area without being noticed, which meant something had triggered it. Again. I rewound the camera footage, 1:42:57 a.m. The system beeped, the sensor icon flashed, motion detected. But the video itself showed nothing moving through the grass. No animals, no people, no vehicles, just empty desert. The first night it happened, I assumed it was a glitch. Old equipment, dust, temperature changes, stuff like that happens. But this was the third night in a row, and the alert had come from the exact same sensor. I zoomed in on the feed. The fence line stretched across the screen, metal posts casting thin shadows under the floodlights. Beyond that, darkness. The sensor sat about 30 yards outside the fence. If something crossed it, the cameras should have picked it up. But nothing appeared. I logged the event anyway. Sensor activation. No visible movement. Standard procedure. The rest of the night passed quietly. The following night, I was already watching the clock around 1:40. Something about the pattern bothered me. At 1:43 a.m. exactly, the alarm sounded again. Same sensor, same location, same empty camera feed. This time, I pulled up the thermal view. Still nothing. No heat signatures, no movement. Just flat, cold desert. I remember thinking maybe the system clock was off. Maybe the alerts were delayed recordings from earlier activity. So I checked the event log. The timestamp matched the exact second the alarm triggered. Real time. Something had crossed that sensor. But nothing appeared on camera. The fifth night, I started watching the feed 30 minutes early. The tower was quiet except for the low hum of the monitor rack. I had a notebook open beside me where I'd started marking the alerts. 1:43 had happened every single night. And when the time came again, the alarm went off. I was already staring directly at the camera. The grass beyond the fence moved slightly in the wind, and then I noticed something small, a patch of grass bent downward, like something had stepped on it. But there was no visible shape, no body, no shadow, just grass flattening for a second, then rising again. My first thought was wind, but the rest of the grass wasn't moving like that. It was localized, one patch at a time. Moving slowly toward the fence, I leaned closer to the screen. Another patch bent, then another. Something was moving across the sensor field, but whatever it was, the cameras couldn't see it. When it reached the fence line, the grass stopped moving. For about 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then the pressure sensor on the inside of the fence triggered. The alarm tone changed. That meant something had crossed the perimeter, but the cameras still showed nothing. The next sensor activated inside the base, 20 yards past the fence, then another, each one lighting up the system map. Something invisible was moving deeper into the base. I grabbed the radio, but I hesitated, because the pattern suddenly changed. The movement stopped. The sensors went quiet. Nothing else triggered for the rest of the night. The next morning, I reported the issue. Engineering checked the system. They said everything was functioning normally. No faults, no miscalibrations. The sensors were extremely sensitive. They only triggered when something with physical weight passed through, which meant the alerts were legitimate. That night, I watched the monitors again. 1:43 a.m. The sensor triggered. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't before. The grass wasn't bending toward the base. It was bending away from it, moving from inside the fence toward the desert. I replayed older footage from previous nights. Same pattern. I had assumed something was entering the base, but the direction was reversed. Every night at 1:43, something crossed the sensors, leaving the base, not entering. And whatever it was, the cameras couldn't see it. I stopped working that tower a few months later, transferred to another post. Before I left, I asked the guy replacing me if he'd seen the alerts. He nodded, said they still happened. Same time, same sensor. Every night. The base eventually upgraded the camera system a year later. Better resolution, better thermal imaging. But the motion alerts never stopped, and according to someone I still know there, the cameras still show nothing. Story 3. The soldier who returned to base. After being declared missing at 3:06 a.m., the checkpoint scanner beeped and the gate light turned green for an ID that had already been removed from the system. I noticed it immediately because I had just finished updating the missing person log 5 minutes earlier. The name that flashed across the screen was Private Daniel Mercer. Mercer had been declared missing 3 days before. Search teams had spent nearly 48 hours combing the training range for him. By the end of the second day, Command stopped the search. Officially, he was listed as lost during field exercise, but the system had just accepted his badge. I looked up toward the outer gate. Someone was walking through. The checkpoint sat at the north access road, about half a mile from the main barracks area. At night, the only light came from 2 overhead flood lamps and the glow from the security monitor inside the booth. The road beyond the gate was empty desert, except for the soldier walking toward me. Same uniform, same height, same gear. For the first few seconds, my brain assumed the obvious explanation, that Mercer had somehow made it back from the desert, and Command hadn't updated us yet. It wouldn't be the strangest thing that had happened during training exercises. But as he got closer, something about the situation didn't line up. Mercer and I had worked together for almost a year. Same maintenance team, same barracks hallway. You get used to people's small habits without realizing it, and the man walking toward the checkpoint didn't move the way Mercer moved. His stride was slightly off, not limping, not injured, just measured, like someone concentrating on walking normally. He reached the concrete barrier in front of the booth and stopped under the light. The scanner on the desk confirmed the badge again. ID verified. Private Daniel Mercer. Up close, his face looked exactly the same. Same short brown hair. Same thin scar above his eyebrow from when he slipped off a truck step months earlier. Same tired look he usually had after long training days. but his eyes were strange. They were pointed in my direction, but they didn't seem to actually focus on me. They stayed fixed slightly past my shoulder, like he was looking at something behind me. For a moment, I just stared at him. Then I said the first normal thing that came to mind. "Mercer." He didn't answer right away. He just stood there. The desert wind moved lightly across the road behind him, carrying dust along the pavement. The rest of the base was quiet. Finally, he nodded once. Slow. I waited for him to start talking. Mercer usually talked constantly, complaining about rations, joking about shifts, asking what he'd missed while out in the field, but he stayed silent. I tried again. "Where the hell did you come from?" There was a pause long enough that I started wondering if he'd even heard me. Then he said quietly, "Out there." His voice sounded like Mercer's, but flatter, less emotion, like someone repeating a line they had practiced. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Something else caught my attention. His uniform. After 3 days in the desert, Mercer should have looked terrible. Dust everywhere, sweat stains, torn fabric. But his uniform looked clean. Not freshly pressed, just not worn. The boots had a thin layer of dirt on them, but not the kind you get after wandering miles through rough terrain. I glanced down at the ID reader again. Still green. I checked the timestamp on the monitor. 3:06 a.m. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe search teams had picked him up earlier and transported him back. Maybe he'd already been checked by medical staff. Still, something about the situation kept bothering me. I signed the entry log. "Go ahead," I said. He nodded again and stepped past the checkpoint barrier. As he walked by, I noticed something small. Mercer always carried his canteen on the left side of his belt. The soldier passing me had it on the right. It's the kind of detail you don't consciously think about, but when it's wrong, it stands out immediately. I watched him walk down the road toward the barracks. The floodlights cast long shadows across the pavement. His posture remained stiff, like he was aware of every step he took. Halfway down the road, he stopped. Just stopped walking. For several seconds, he stood completely still under the dim light of a distant lamppost. Then he turned slightly and looked back toward the checkpoint. Not directly at me, just toward the booth. The same unfocused gaze. Then he continued walking. The rest of my shift passed quietly, but something about that encounter kept replaying in my head. Around sunrise, the base went into restricted movement. Medical vehicles arrived near the barracks. Officers started asking questions about the night checkpoint logs. By mid-morning, 2 investigators came to the booth and asked me to explain exactly what I had seen. When I mentioned Mercer walking through the gate, they exchanged a look. Then one of them asked something that made my stomach drop. "Are you certain it was him?" I said yes. The ID badge matched. The scanner confirmed his fingerprints. The facial recognition camera recorded a positive match. Everything said it was Mercer. The investigator wrote something in a notebook. Then he told me something I didn't expect. Search teams had actually found Mercer. Late on the second night, about 10 miles outside the training range. He had died sometime earlier that day, which meant Mercer had already been dead nearly 24 hours before the man walked through my checkpoint. I didn't know what to say to that. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The face, the voice, the uniform. Everything had been identical. But the more I thought about the encounter, the more certain details started to stand out. The unnatural way he walked, the perfectly clean uniform, the way his eyes never focused on anything. A few days later, I heard the soldier who came through the gate had been moved off the base. No official report, no explanation, just transferred somewhere else under supervision. Most people eventually stopped talking about it. Training exercises continued. New soldiers rotated in. Life on the base went back to normal. But sometimes when I think about that night, one detail still bothers me more than anything else. When Mercer reached the checkpoint barrier, he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask where to scan his badge. He didn't look around. He walked straight to the exact spot where the scanner sat on the desk inside the booth. The problem is, Mercer had never been assigned to checkpoint duty. He had never worked that gate. He had never even been inside the booth before. Yet somehow, at 3:06 a.m., he knew exactly where everything was. Story 1. The missile defense system that tried to launch by itself at 2:17 a.m. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the launch console in front of me lit up and emitted a low confirmation tone I had never heard outside of drills. It was the sound that meant a missile sequence had been authorized. The problem was, there was no alert, no incoming threat, and I hadn't touched anything. And according to the system, the command had just been entered from my station. I remember staring at the screen for a few seconds, expecting it to correct itself. Systems glitch sometimes, especially the older modules we still used, but this wasn't a flicker or a lag. The interface had already moved past the initial authorization phase and into sequence preparation. I checked the radar first out of instinct. Clear. Completely clear. No unidentified objects, no incoming signatures, nothing even close to restricted airspace. For a moment, I thought maybe I had missed an alert tone. Maybe I'd zoned out. Night shifts do that to you. The room was quiet, dim, and always a little too warm. We kept the lights low to reduce glare on the screens. Most nights, the loudest thing was the hum of the ventilation system, but I knew I hadn't touched the console. I physically pulled my hands back and rested them on my lap, like I needed to prove it to myself. The countdown hadn't started yet, but the system was clearly moving in that direction. I leaned forward and opened the access logs. That's when things stopped making sense in a way that felt deliberate. The authorization wasn't listed under my credentials. It showed a user ID, one I didn't recognize. I assumed it was some upper-level override. That happens occasionally. Command exercises, silent tests, things we're not always briefed on right away. So I checked the clearance level. It wasn't higher than mine. It was outdated. The timestamp next to the user profile said the account hadn't been active in over 6 years. I frowned and leaned closer to the screen, thinking maybe the system had pulled an archived credential by mistake. But that didn't explain why it showed the authorization as coming from inside the control room. There are only 2 consoles in that room. Mine, and the secondary station across from me. I turned in my chair and looked at it. It was dark, inactive. No one was there. I actually stood up and walked over just to be sure. The chair was pushed in, exactly how I'd left it earlier in the shift. The screen was off. I tapped the keyboard lightly. Nothing. When I came back to my station, the system had advanced another step. The preparation phase was now at 30%. That's when I felt the first real shift. Not panic, just a tightening in my chest. I picked up the internal line and called security. No answer. I hung up, waited a second, then tried again. Still nothing. That wasn't normal. Even on quiet nights, someone always picked up within a few rings. I told myself they were probably handling something elsewhere on the base. Maybe a patrol check, maybe a false alarm. It happens, but it didn't explain the console. I went back to the logs and scrolled further. More entries were appearing in real time. The same user ID, executing commands, adjusting parameters, confirming sequences. Each one stamped as coming from the secondary console. I remember thinking, maybe the system is looping old data. Maybe it's replaying archived commands for some reason. But the timestamps were current, down to the second, and the sequence percentage kept climbing. 45%, 50%. I sat down slowly, trying to think through procedure. There were manual overrides, but initiating them without proper authorization could trigger an internal lockdown. Worse, It could escalate the situation if the system interpreted it as interference. So I hesitated. Just for a few seconds. That hesitation is something I still think about, because during those few seconds, the system did something I had never seen before. It opened a secondary confirmation window and displayed a name. Not just the user ID, a full name. I recognized it immediately, not because I knew the person, but because I had seen the name on a plaque in the briefing hallway. A former officer, killed during a training accident years before I was assigned to that base. I remember saying the name out loud, quietly, like I was testing it. It felt wrong to see it there, like the system had pulled something it shouldn't even have access to. The sequence hit 60%. That snapped me out of it. I initiated a manual halt. The system didn't respond. I tried again, this time entering my credentials twice. Still nothing. The console accepted the input, but didn't stop the process. That's when the countdown appeared. T-minus 120 seconds. I felt my hands go cold. I picked up the phone again, dialing a different line this time. Operations command. It rang once. Then the line went dead. Not disconnected. Just silent. Like the connection had been cut mid-signal. I set the receiver down slowly and looked back at the screen. The logs were still updating. The same user, still issuing commands. T-minus 90 seconds. I remember standing up again and turning toward the secondary console. Not expecting anything. Just drawn to it. And for a second, I'm not sure how long, I thought I saw something. Not a person. Just a change. Like the chair had shifted slightly, or like there was movement just outside the edge of my vision. I blinked, stepped closer, and the room looked exactly the same as before. Empty. Still. T-minus 60 seconds. I went back to my station and initiated a full system reset. It's something we're trained never to do during an active sequence, but at that point it didn't feel like a normal situation anymore. The screen froze for a second. Then everything went black. No warning, no confirmation. Just off. The room went completely quiet. Even the ventilation hum seemed to drop out for a moment. I stood there, not moving, waiting for something, anything, to come back online. After maybe 10 seconds, the system rebooted. Standard startup screen. No active alerts, no sequence, no logs beyond routine monitoring data. It was like the last 10 minutes had never happened. I checked everything. Twice. Radar, clear. Authorization logs, empty. User activity, normal. No trace of the name. No trace of the commands. Just gone. Security finally returned my call about 20 minutes later. They said there had been a temporary comms outage across part of the base. Routine maintenance issue. Nothing unusual. I didn't mention the console. At the time, I wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding like I'd made a mistake. And in that environment, mistakes follow you. But a few days later, during a routine systems review, I quietly asked one of the senior techs about archived user credentials. I mentioned the name. He didn't react immediately, just looked at me for a second longer than expected. Then he said that account had been permanently deactivated after the accident, removed from all active systems. Shouldn't be accessible anymore, he told me. I nodded like that made sense, like it was just a technical detail, but I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I finished my rotation a few weeks later and requested a transfer. Officially, it was for schedule reasons, closer to home, better hours. That's what I told them. But the truth is, I couldn't sit in that room again. Not after that night. Not after watching a system try to carry out a command that no one gave. And sometimes, this is the part that still bothers me. I think about those logs, the way they updated in real time, the way the commands came from the other console, because I know what I saw, and I know that for those 10 minutes, the system believed someone else was in that room with me. Story 2, the radar that detected something approaching the base that was never there. At 3:08 a.m., the long-range radar flagged a fast-moving object entering restricted airspace, and the alert tone sounded twice before cutting off mid-beep. The track appeared instantly, already inside the outer detection ring, moving faster than anything we usually saw on that system. But there was no transponder, no altitude data, no thermal signature. And when I checked the sky cameras, there was nothing there. I remember leaning back in my chair, waiting for the system to correct itself. False tracks happen, especially with older radar arrays, but they usually jitter, fade, or disappear within a few seconds. This one didn't. It held steady, speed constant, direction fixed, heading straight toward the base. I zoomed in on the track and ran a quick classification check. The system couldn't identify it as aircraft, drone, or debris. It just labeled it as unknown object, which I had only seen once before during a training simulation. I glanced at the clock again. 3:09 a.m. The object had already closed a noticeable distance. I picked up the radio and called it in to the on-duty supervisor. Control, this is Radar 2. I've got an unidentified track approaching from the northwest. No signature. There was a pause on the line, then, confirmed, no signature. None, I said. No transponder, no heat, nothing. Another pause. Keep tracking. We're checking other systems. I set the radio down and leaned closer to the screen. The movement was too clean. No drift, no variation. Just a straight, direct path, like it wasn't affected by wind or altitude changes. I opened the secondary radar feed, the shorter range system we used as backup. Nothing. Completely empty. I switched back to the primary display. The object was still there. Closer now. I told myself it had to be a system error, something in the long-range calibration, maybe a reflection or a ghost return. But even ghost returns don't move like that. They don't maintain speed. They don't follow a perfect line. And they definitely don't head directly toward a fixed location. 3:12 a.m. The track crossed into the second perimeter ring. I checked the external camera feeds again. The sky above the base was clear. No lights, no movement. Just the usual faint glow from distant towns and the occasional blinking aircraft miles away. I remember squinting at one of the monitors, thinking maybe I was missing something, some small detail, some faint flicker. But there was nothing. The radio crackled. Radar 2, confirm visual. Negative, I said. No visual contact. Thermal. Negative. Another pause. Maintain tracking. I could hear something in the supervisor's voice now. Not panic, just hesitation. Like he was waiting for the system to prove itself wrong. 3:14 a.m. The object slowed. Not gradually, it just changed speed. From extremely fast to something more controlled, like it had reached a certain point and adjusted itself. I remember thinking, that's not how anything moves. Even drones don't shift like that without some visible change in pattern. I leaned forward and pulled up the data logs. The system still couldn't assign any physical properties. No size, no altitude, just position and movement. It was like tracking something that didn't fully exist. 3:15 a.m. The track stopped, right outside the inner perimeter. Not hovering, not circling, just stationary. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to disappear, but it stayed, perfectly still. I checked the timestamp. The system was still updating, still confirming its position every second. I switched to another camera feed, one that covered the outer fence line. Nothing. The ground was empty. The fence lights were on, casting that same dull yellow glow across the gravel and access road. No shadows, no movement. I remember thinking, maybe it's above the camera range, so I checked the upward-facing cameras. Still nothing, just empty sky. The radio came back. Radar 2, we're not seeing anything on secondary systems. Same here, I said. Only primary is tracking it. Hold position. Do not escalate yet. That last part stuck with me. Do not escalate yet. Like they weren't sure if this was real, or if I was. 3:17 a.m. The object moved again, but this time it didn't follow a straight path. It shifted sideways, a sharp, unnatural angle, like it had skipped across space instead of traveling through it. I actually blinked and checked the replay function. The movement was there, logged, recorded, but it didn't look right. There was no transition, no arc, just one position, then another. Closer, inside the perimeter. I felt something tighten in my chest, because at that point it wasn't just approaching the base anymore. It was inside it. I checked the internal sensors. No alarms, no motion detection, no pressure changes, nothing. The system was telling me something had entered one of the most secure areas on the base, and every other system was saying it was empty. 3:18 a.m. The track moved again, closer to the control building, closer to me. I remember looking up from the screen and glancing at the door to the radar room. It was closed, locked. The hallway outside was silent. I could hear the faint hum of the equipment racks behind me, the soft ticking of the wall clock. Everything felt normal. Too normal. I looked back at the radar. The object was now directly over the building, right above my position. I held my breath for a second without realizing it, waiting. For what? I don't know. A sound, a vibration, anything. But there was nothing. Just silence. 3:19 a.m. The track disappeared. No fade, no signal loss warning. Just gone. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the empty screen. Then I checked the logs. The entire track was still recorded. Every movement, every position, until the last point, directly above the control room. Then nothing. No exit path, no disappearance marker. Just an end. The radio came back again. Radar 2, confirm status. I hesitated. Then I said, track is gone. Copy. We're clearing it as a false return. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. Copy. The rest of the shift was quiet. Too quiet. I kept checking the radar every few minutes, expecting something else to appear. But it didn't. By 6 a.m., the system looked completely normal, like nothing had happened. Later that week, I reviewed the recorded data with a systems analyst. We went through the track frame by frame. He didn't say much at first, just kept replaying the same segment where the object shifted inside the perimeter. Finally, he paused the video and said, "That's not a movement pattern." I asked what he meant. He leaned back in his chair and pointed at the screen. "That's relocation." I remember frowning. "What's the difference?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Movement implies time between positions. This doesn't show time passing." I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I didn't argue. A few days later, the official report came back. System anomaly. No physical object detected. Case closed. That should have been the end of it. And for a while it was, until I noticed something I hadn't seen before. It was in the timestamp logs. Right at the moment the track disappeared, there was a 1-second gap, a missing second. Not just in the radar system, in the entire network. Every synchronized clock on the base skipped from 3:1912 to 3:1914. No explanation, no recorded cause, just a second that wasn't there. I didn't report it. At that point, I'd already said enough. But sometimes I still think about that track, the way it moved, the way it stopped, the way it ended directly above me, and that missing second. Because I can't shake the feeling that whatever the radar was tracking didn't disappear. It just stopped being something the system could see. Story 3. The emergency launch code that appeared on the screen. When the control room was empty, condensed. At 1:42 a.m., the emergency authorization panel turned red, and a valid launch code appeared on my screen without any input. The system logged it as entered from the secondary console across the room, but I had locked that console myself, and I was the only one inside. I didn't react immediately. I just watched the code, waiting for it to disappear. It didn't. Every segment checked out. Format correct. Validation green. It was a real code, fully accepted by the system. I turned slowly toward the secondary console. Dark screen. Chair pushed in. No movement. Exactly how I'd left it. I opened the input logs. Source. Console B. Authorization. Command override. Status. Accepted. My console showed nothing. I walked over to console B, each step sounding hollow under the floor panels. When I reached it, I tapped the screen. It woke up instantly. Idle display. No session. No activity. Even the dust on the edges looked untouched. I told myself it had to be a logging error. That was the only explanation that made sense. When I got back to my station, the code was still there, waiting. I pulled up the authorization details. There was a name attached. It took me a second to recognize it. Then I did. An officer from an old training report. Dead for years. I actually said no under my breath, like that would fix it. I opened the personnel database. The profile confirmed it. Status: deceased. Authorization revoked. Account removed. But the code was still active. The system wasn't questioning it. At 1:44 a.m., the logs updated. Console B, session active. I looked up immediately. Nothing had changed. The console was still dark, still empty. I walked over again, slower this time, and that's when I noticed the chair. It wasn't fully tucked in anymore, just slightly pulled back. I stopped. I was sure it hadn't been like that before. I told myself I just hadn't noticed. That felt easier. I leaned in and tapped a key. The screen flickered, and for a split second I saw something behind the idle display. A different interface. Gone before I could focus. I stepped back. Something about the room felt different now. Not louder, not colder, just occupied. When I returned to my console, a countdown had appeared. Not for launch, for authorization. T-minus 60 seconds. I had to either confirm it or cancel it. Ignoring it wasn't an option. The logs updated again. Console B, input received. I didn't hear anything. No keys, no movement. I looked up, straight at the other console, and for the first time I had a clear thought I couldn't explain. I'm not alone in here. T-minus 20 seconds. My hand hovered over the cancel command, and I hesitated, because something didn't feel right about stopping it. Like I didn't understand what I was interrupting. T-minus 10 seconds. The room felt unnaturally still, like everything was waiting for me to decide. I canceled it. The screen froze. Then the red panel disappeared. The code was gone. No confirmation. No warning. Just normal again. I didn't move for a while after that. Just listened. Nothing else happened. Later, I checked the logs. The session from Console B was there. But the ending wasn't. No logout. No timestamp. Just session terminated. That week, I asked an engineer about old authorization codes. He told me they couldn't be reactivated. I mentioned the officer's name. He paused, then said that account had been completely wiped after the incident. Not archived, removed. Before I left, I asked about Console B. He checked his system and said it had been logging brief session activity during night hours. Unassigned user, he said. Probably a glitch. Probably. I transferred out a month later. I haven't worked in a control room since. But sometimes when I think about that night, one detail doesn't sit right with me. It's not the code. It's not the logs. It's the way the system responded. Because it didn't treat that input like an error, it treated it like someone had been sitting at that console the whole time. Story 1. The car that was already abandoned. At 3:12 a.m., I noticed the headlights first, steady, bright, pointed straight down the empty stretch of Highway 90. The engine was running, a low idle I could hear, even with my windows up. But there was no one inside the car. That didn't make sense. Not out there, not at that hour. I slowed my cruiser and pulled in behind it, tires crunching lightly on the gravel shoulder. The highway had been dead for the last 20 minutes. No passing trucks, no distant tail lights, nothing but open Texas land and that single vehicle sitting like it had been placed there. I remember thinking maybe the driver stepped off into the brush. People did that sometimes. Drunk, tired, or just not thinking straight. Still, something about it felt off. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I've got a vehicle on the shoulder, eastbound Highway 90 near mile marker 214. Engines running, no visible occupant. There was a brief pause, long enough that I checked my radio to make sure it hadn't cut out. Then dispatch came back. Unit 12, confirm location. I repeated it, glancing at the mile marker sign just to be sure. The numbers reflected faintly in my headlights. Another pause. Longer this time. Unit 12, she said, slower now. That vehicle was reported abandoned 2 hours ago, near mile marker 193. I frowned. That's about 20 miles west, I said. Affirmative. I looked at the car again. Same Texas plates, slight dent on the rear bumper. Even from where I was sitting, I could see a fast food bag on the passenger seat. I remember thinking maybe dispatch got the report wrong, or maybe it had been towed and dumped again. It happens, rare, but not impossible. Copy that, I said. I'll check it out. I stepped out of my cruiser. The air felt colder than it had any right to be for that time of year. Not freezing, just enough to make me notice it. The engine of the abandoned car hummed steadily. No music, no movement inside. The headlights cut across the road in a clean, unmoving beam. I approached from the driver's side, one hand resting near my holster out of habit. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I leaned slightly, trying to see inside without putting my face right up to the glass. The seat was empty. Keys were still in the ignition. The dashboard lights were on. There was something ordinary about it. Too ordinary. I checked the back seat. Nothing. No bags, no movement, no sign anyone had been there recently except for that fast food wrapper. For a second I wondered if I had just missed them. Maybe they stepped off right before I pulled up. But I hadn't seen anyone. And there's not a lot of places to go out there. Just flat land and low brush stretching for miles. I circled around to the rear of the car. The license plate matched what dispatch had on file. That's when I noticed something else. The driver's door. It was locked. I tested it once just to be sure. It didn't budge, which didn't line up with someone stepping out in a hurry. I stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. No wind, no insects, just the quiet hum of two engines, mine and the car's. It felt contained, like the sound wasn't traveling anywhere. I went back to my cruiser and got on the radio again. Dispatch, I've got visual confirmation. Vehicle matches the earlier report. But it's here, not where it was originally found. There was a soft crackle. Understood. Do you require backup? I hesitated. No, I said. I'll stay with the vehicle until we figure this out. I got back into my seat, leaving my headlights on. The abandoned car sat just ahead of me, unchanged. For a minute or two, nothing happened. I remember checking the time on my dash clock. 3:16 a.m. I leaned back slightly, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it had been moved. Maybe someone had driven it out here and left it again. But then, why report it abandoned earlier? And why leave the engine running twice? I rubbed my eyes and glanced up at the rearview mirror. That's when my stomach dropped. The road behind me had been empty, completely empty. Now there was a car parked directly behind my cruiser, headlights off, engine silent. It hadn't been there before. I'm sure of that. I turned in my seat and looked back through the rear window. Same car, same dent on the bumper, same license plate. For a second, my brain tried to correct it. Like maybe I was looking at the same car from a different angle, but that didn't make sense, because the original car was still in front of me. I snapped my head forward. It was gone. The shoulder ahead of me was empty. No headlights, no engine, no car, just darkness stretching down the highway. I felt this tight pressure in my chest, not panic, not exactly, just a kind of forced awareness, like my body knew something before my mind caught up. I looked back in the mirror again. The car behind me hadn't moved. I sat there for a few seconds trying to think through it logically. Maybe I had pulled up behind the wrong vehicle. Maybe another car had come in behind me without me noticing. But I knew that wasn't true. There hadn't been any sound, no headlights passing, no indication of movement. And out there, you hear everything. I reached for the radio again. "Dispatch," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Can you confirm the status of that vehicle?" There was a pause, then, "Unit 12. The vehicle is still listed as abandoned at mile marker 193. I stared at the mirror, the car behind me, the one that had somehow replaced the one in front. It was exactly the same. "Negative," I said quietly. "It's behind me now." There was no response right away, just static. I didn't wait. I started the engine fully, put the cruiser in drive, and pulled forward slowly. Not fast, just enough to create distance. The headlights swept across the empty road ahead. I kept my eyes on the mirror. The car stayed where it was for a moment. Then, it turned on its headlights. No delay, no flicker, just instantly on. And then it started moving. Slow at first, matching my speed exactly. I pressed the accelerator a little more. It kept pace. No engine sound, no visible driver. Just those headlights holding steady behind me. I remember thinking, very clearly, that if I stopped, it would stop too. And I didn't want to find out what happened after that. So I kept driving. I didn't look back again after the next mile marker. I just focused on the road, on the center line, on keeping my hands steady on the wheel. Eventually, I saw distant lights ahead, a truck stop about 10 miles out. By the time I reached it, the road behind me was empty again. No car, no headlights, nothing. Later that morning, I filed the report. They checked traffic cams along that stretch. There was no record of any vehicle behind me. No second car, no movement matching what I described. The original abandoned vehicle, it was still logged at mile marker 193. Never moved, never recovered. They even sent someone out to confirm. It was exactly where it had been reported hours earlier. Engine off, cold, no sign it had been driven recently. I stayed on that route for another 6 months. Nothing like that ever happened again. But I started noticing something I hadn't before. Sometimes, late at night, I'd check my rearview mirror out of habit. And for just a second, I'd think I saw headlights. Not approaching, not passing, just there, keeping distance, matching my speed. And every time I looked again, there was nothing. Story 2. The gas station that wasn't on any map. At 3:04 a.m., my fuel light came on just as I passed a flickering gas station sign on the right side of Route 281. One of the overhead lights buzzed loudly, cutting in and out like it couldn't decide whether to stay on. I hadn't seen a station on this stretch in over 30 miles. That alone didn't make sense. I slowed down and checked my dashboard again, like maybe I'd misread it. The tank was low, lower than I was comfortable with. I didn't remember passing any exits or signs for fuel before that. For a second, I thought maybe it was closed, but the single working pump was lit. I pulled in. The gravel under my tires sounded loose and uneven, like the place hadn't been maintained in years. My headlights swept across the front of the building, small, rectangular, with dusty windows and a faded, open sign that glowed weakly in the corner. There were no other cars. I stepped out and immediately noticed how quiet it was. Not just empty, quiet in a way that felt contained, like the sound didn't travel beyond the edge of the lot. The pump looked older than anything I'd seen still in use. The display flickered when I lifted the nozzle, numbers resetting slowly like it was struggling to keep up. I remember thinking, at least it works. As I started fueling, I glanced toward the building. There was a man inside, standing behind the counter. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, facing the door. I couldn't see his face clearly through the glass, but I knew he was looking directly at me. Not casually, not like someone waiting for a customer, just fixed. I told myself it was normal. Small stations like this, especially overnight, the clerk usually just watches whoever pulls in. Still, something about how still he was made it hard to look away. The pump clicked off sooner than I expected. I checked the display. The amount didn't quite match what I thought I needed, but I figured maybe the tank wasn't as low as it seemed. I put the nozzle back and walked toward the entrance. The bell above the door didn't ring when I opened it. Inside, the air felt slightly warmer than outside, but stale, like it hadn't circulated in a while. The man was exactly where I'd seen him. Middle-aged, maybe. Plain clothes, no name tag. He didn't greet me, didn't nod, didn't move. For a moment, I thought maybe he hadn't noticed me come in, but his eyes were already on me. "Evening," I said. No response. I stepped up to the counter and placed a few bills down. "Pump 1. He looked down at the money, slowly, then back at me. Still no words. He reached out, took the cash, and opened the register. The drawer slid out with a dull mechanical sound that felt louder than it should have been. No change, no receipt. He just closed it and stepped back. I waited a second, expecting something else, a total, a nod, anything. Nothing. I told myself, he's just odd. That's all. It happens. I turned and walked out. The air outside felt colder than before. I got back into my cruiser, shut the door, and sat there for a second with my hands on the wheel. I don't know why I hesitated. Everything had gone fine. Strange, sure, but fine. Still, something in the back of my mind kept replaying how the guy had just stood there, watching. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. As soon as I was back on the road, I glanced at my GPS. It still showed the same stretch of highway. No gas station behind me. I zoomed out a little. Nothing. No marker. No business listing. No structure of any kind. I frowned and tapped the screen, thinking maybe it just hadn't updated. But even after refreshing it, the map showed empty land stretching for miles in both directions. I slowed slightly and checked my rearview mirror. The road behind me was dark. No lights, no sign of the station. For a second, I thought maybe I'd pulled into a side road or a private property not listed on GPS. But I hadn't turned. I was sure of that. I kept driving for another minute before reaching for the radio. "Dispatch, Unit 12. Can you confirm any active gas stations on Route 281 near my current location?" There was a short pause. "Unit 12, nearest listed station, is approximately 32 miles north of your position." I glanced at my dashboard. The fuel gauge hadn't moved. Still low. Exactly where it had been before I stopped. I felt this slow, creeping unease settle in. "Negative," I said. I just refueled. Another pause. "Can you confirm the location of the station?" I looked ahead at the road. There was nothing there. No sign. No turnoff. Just empty highway. "I can't," I said. Back at the station later that morning, I pulled the dashcam footage. I needed to see it again, just to make sure I hadn't missed something. The video showed everything clearly. The sign, the building, the pump, even the man inside, standing there, watching. The audio picked up the hum of the lights, the sound of gravel under my tires, even the click of the pump shutting off. It was all there, exactly how I remembered it. But when we pulled up satellite view of that exact location, there was nothing, no building, no road leading off the highway, just flat, empty land, undisturbed. They even sent someone out later that day to check. There were no tire tracks, no gravel, no evidence anything had ever been there. For a while, I tried to explain it. Outdated maps, temporary structure, maybe even some kind of setup that got removed overnight. But none of it held up, because of one detail I couldn't ignore. The receipt. I never got one. And my cash, it was still in my pocket, folded exactly the way I remembered placing it on the counter. I still work night shifts, still take long routes through empty highways, but I don't let my fuel drop below half anymore. Not because I'm worried about running out, but because I know if I ever see that station again, I probably won't have the choice to drive past it. Story 3. The radio call that came from his own unit. At 2:41 a.m., my radio crackled and a voice came through, clear and immediate. Unit 12, respond immediately. I was already driving, already on patrol, and I hadn't called anything in. For a second, I thought maybe dispatch was just assigning me something routine. A late-night disturbance, maybe a vehicle check. But something about the tone made me pause. It wasn't dispatch. It sounded like me. Not close, not similar, exact. I reached for the radio. Dispatch, Unit 12. Go ahead. There was a short delay. Then a different voice, our actual dispatcher, came through, steady and confused. Unit 12, we just received a call from your unit requesting immediate response. Can you confirm? I felt a slight pressure build behind my eyes, like my brain was trying to sort something too quickly. Negative, I said. I didn't transmit. There was a pause on the line. Copy that. Stand by. I glanced down at the radio panel, half expecting to see something wrong. Stuck button, interference, anything that could explain it. Everything looked normal. The road ahead stretched empty under my headlights. No cars, no movement. Just a long, straight piece of highway cutting through low fields and scattered fencing. I told myself it was probably a glitch. Radio overlap, maybe. Another unit transmitting on the same frequency. It happens. Still, I adjusted the volume slightly, like that might somehow make things clearer. Unit 12, dispatch came back. Slower now. We're pulling the transmission log. Copy. I kept driving. For the next minute or so, nothing happened. Just the quiet hum of the engine and the faint static of the radio. I remember thinking I'd probably laugh about it later. Some weird technical issue, nothing more. Then the radio clicked again. Same voice. My voice. Unit 12, I need you to respond now. This time it was closer, more direct. And there was something underneath it. Not urgency exactly, but pressure. Like whoever was speaking expected an answer. I didn't respond right away, I just listened. The transmission ended with a soft burst of static. I swallowed and keyed the mic. Dispatch, did you copy that? A beat. Yes, she said. We received it. Is that coming from me again? Another pause. Affirmative. I felt my grip tighten slightly on the wheel. That's not possible, I said, more to myself than to her. Unit 12, she replied carefully. We're showing your unit ID as the source of both transmissions. I checked the radio again. The button wasn't stuck. There was no sign it had been keyed without me noticing. "I haven't touched the mic," I said. "I understand." The way she said it told me she didn't. Or maybe she did, and that was worse. I slowed slightly, scanning the road out of habit more than anything. Still nothing ahead. I started thinking through possibilities. Maybe someone was using my unit ID. Maybe a signal relay issue. Something technical I didn't fully understand. But that didn't explain the voice. "Dispatch," I said. "Can you play back the transmission?" There was a short delay. "Stand by." The radio went quiet again. I drove another half-mile, passing an old cattle gate and a stretch of fence I recognized from earlier in the shift. Same route, same landmarks, everything normal. Too normal. Then the playback came through, a short burst of static, and then my voice, clear, calm. "Unit 12, respond immediately." I felt a cold shift in my chest. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. Same tone, same pacing, even the slight flattening on certain words I'd noticed in recordings of myself before. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The playback continued. "Unit 12, I need you to respond now." There was a pause. Then something I didn't remember hearing before. "Before you see it." The transmission cut out. I stared straight ahead, my focus narrowing without me realizing it. "Dispatch," I said quietly. That last part, was that in the original transmission? Silence. Then, "Negative." My hands felt steady on the wheel, but there was a disconnect now, like I was moving through something slightly out of sync. "I'm going to pull over," I said. "Copy." I eased the cruiser onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. The headlights stretched out across the road, illuminating the empty lane ahead. I put the car in park, but didn't turn off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, listening. Nothing. No wind, no distant traffic, just the low idle of the engine and the faint hiss of the radio. I told myself to think. If it was interference, it would stop. If it was someone else, they'd respond. But deep down, there was another thought pushing in. If it's coming from your unit, then where is it being sent from? I reached for the dash cam controls. If something was transmitting, maybe it would have picked it up. I scrolled back through the recent footage, stopping at the timestamp from the first call. The video showed exactly what I expected. Empty road, steady headlights, no movement. Then the audio played. My voice came through the speakers. Same as before. But this time I noticed something else. A faint background noise. Not static, something rhythmic, soft. I leaned closer, turning up the volume. It took a second to recognize it. Turn signal, click, pause, click. I froze. Because my turn signal wasn't on, I glanced at the dashboard to confirm. Nothing. I looked back at the screen. The sound continued in the recording. Click, pause, click. And then I saw it, at the very edge of the frame, behind my cruiser. A faint reflection. 2 points of light. Headlights. I don't remember seeing them at the time, but they were there, following at a distance, perfectly aligned with my lane. The video continued. The headlights stayed consistent, never getting closer, never falling back. Just there. Then the second transmission played. Before you see it, the headlights in the video disappeared. Not faded, not turned, just gone. I sat back slowly, my eyes shifting to the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. But for a second, just a second, I thought I could still hear it. That soft, steady rhythm. Click, pause, click. I didn't stay there long. I put the car back in drive and pulled onto the road, picking up speed without really thinking about it. The rest of the shift passed without anything else happening. No more transmissions, no strange vehicles, nothing. Later, they checked the logs again. Every transmission had come from my unit ID, time-stamped accurately. No sign of interference, no duplicate signal, nothing. They even inspected the radio equipment. No faults, no malfunctions, everything working exactly as it should. I requested a copy of the audio afterward. I don't know why. Maybe I thought listening to it again would make it feel less personal. It didn't. Because there was one detail I hadn't noticed that night. Something small, easy to miss. In the second recording, right before the final line, you can hear me breathing. Not the way I normally do. Slower, measured, like I was trying to stay quiet, like I was already aware of something behind me. I still use the same unit, same radio, same routes. But sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet, I catch myself checking the mic, making sure I didn't press it without realizing. And every now and then, I think about that last line, not the one I heard, the one that came after, because whatever sent that message, it wasn't trying to warn me, it was telling me I was about to notice it. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the family. Before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more real horror stories like this. And drop a comment telling where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Thank you for being part of the family. Now, let's begin tonight's story. At 2:17 a.m. inside Area 51, something logged in that wasn't there. 2:17 a.m. internal system log recorded an active session. No corresponding login. According to the shift assignment for that night, Control Room B was operating under single operator protocol. That meant one person physically present. That was me. No scheduled maintenance, no system updates, no remote override windows, no overlapping personnel. Everything about that shift was supposed to be routine. At first, it didn't seem unusual. The system we used wasn't exactly new. It had been patched, upgraded, layered over the years. But the core structure was older than most of the people working there. Because of that, small inconsistencies weren't rare. Delayed logs, duplicate entries, occasional phantom alerts that disappeared after refresh. So, when the alert appeared on my screen, I didn't react immediately. The room was quiet, not silent, but controlled. A constant low-frequency hum filled the space. Cooling systems behind the walls, air cycling through vents, soft electrical vibrations from active hardware. No windows, no outside reference, just artificial lighting and system clocks. I remember checking the timestamp twice, 2:17 a.m. Exactly. Unauthorized internal access detected. The message stayed for a few seconds, long enough to read. Then it disappeared. I waited. Sometimes the system repeats alerts if they're valid. Sometimes it clears them if they're not. Nothing happened. Then, another line appeared. Command input received. That's when I leaned forward. Because I hadn't touched the keyboard. My hands were resting away from it. I checked the input monitor. No keystrokes registered. I turned slightly in my chair, looked across the room. 6 terminals total. Mine was active. The rest were dark. No movement, no sound, no indication that anyone else was inside. I opened the activity log, scrolled back carefully, checked timestamps. 2:17:08 command received. Source, local terminal. 3. Terminal 3 was along the far wall, roughly 10 feet away. Screen off, chair aligned, no status lights. At the time, I assumed it was a delayed process. Something queued earlier. That happens. Not often, but enough. Still, I stood up, just to confirm. The floor panels made that hollow, contained sound under each step. Everything familiar, everything normal. As I approached Terminal 3, the monitor turned on. Slowly, not sudden, not reactive, just Waking up. That's what stood out. Because I hadn't touched it yet. The screen lit up with a command interface already open. No login prompt, no authentication screen. That shouldn't happen. Even internal systems require credentials, always. I didn't sit down, didn't touch anything, just watched. Then the text updated. Awaiting confirmation. I remember thinking, confirmation for what? I looked back toward my station. No mirrored activity, no duplicated input. I checked the room again. Door sealed, access panel inactive. No footsteps, no sound. I stepped back, walked to my console, opened the broader system overview. Another command appeared. Same source, Terminal 3. Initializing sequence. At first, it didn't seem important, until I checked what sequence it was tied to. It wasn't diagnostic, not maintenance. It was part of internal containment protocols. That's when I paused, actually paused, because those systems don't activate automatically. They require multiple levels of authorization, manual confirmation, supervisor approval. I checked authorization logs. Nothing. No credentials, no user ID, just execution. Looking back, that doesn't make sense. The system shouldn't allow that. I attempted to override, entered my credentials, requested halt. Request denied. No reason, no escalation, just denied. That was the first moment something felt off. Not dramatic, not obvious, just slightly wrong. I looked back at Terminal 3. The brightness had increased. Subtly, new text appeared. Confirmation received. I hadn't confirmed anything. I stood up again, slower this time, more aware of the room. The chair in front of Terminal 3 was slightly pulled back. I don't remember seeing it move, and I don't remember it being like that earlier. Could have been nothing, but I noticed it. I stood beside the terminal, close enough to touch the keyboard. Didn't. The cursor blinked steadily. Perfect timing, no delay. Then, another line appeared. Process continuing. I went back to my station, opened deeper logs. Everything was being recorded as valid activity. No anomalies, no warnings, except there was no user. The user field was empty. Every entry. That shouldn't happen. The system requires identification. Even automated scripts are tagged. This wasn't. At 2:20 a.m., another entry appeared. Internal presence verified. That line didn't match anything I recognized. I searched documentation, command references, system directories. Nothing. No match. At the time, I assumed it was classified, above my clearance. But even then, it should have had an identifier. This didn't. The air felt slightly cooler, not dramatically, just enough to notice. Or maybe I imagined it. Hard to say. I placed my hand near the keyboard, not touching. And then the system responded. Do not interrupt. I pulled my hand back immediately because I hadn't touched anything. So it wasn't responding to input. It was responding to presence. That realization came slowly. I stepped back, looked around the room again. Everything unchanged, but something was active. Inside the system, inside the room. And it wasn't external. The logs confirmed that. Every command source, internal, already inside. That's what stood out. At 2:22 a.m., I opened process tracking. The activity wasn't centralized. It was distributed. Small changes across multiple systems, lighting, airflow, security sensors, all subtle, like something was mapping the environment, or learning it. 2:23 a.m. The overhead lights dimmed slightly, logged as system adjustment, but no command source. At 2:24 a.m., the door status panel flickered. Locked, unlocked, locked. No sound, no movement, just the display. That shouldn't happen. At 2:25 a.m., I checked the camera feed. Corner-mounted unit, wide angle, covered the entire room, including Terminal 3, including me. At first, everything looked normal. Then I noticed something small. The angle was slightly different. Not repositioned, just adjusted, like the system had shifted its own perspective. I compared it to earlier footage. The difference was subtle, but it was there. At 2:26 a.m., everything stopped. No updates, no movement, no system activity. Just stillness. Then, one final line appeared. Adaptation complete. Terminal 3 powered down. My console returned to normal. No alerts, no sessions, no activity. Like nothing had happened. I checked the logs again. Everything was still recorded, but system status showed no active processes, which didn't match at all. I filed a report, detailed, included everything. They reviewed it. Took longer than usual. 2 days later, they called it unverified system behavior. Terminal 3 was removed. Maintenance report, hardware inconsistencies, no replacement installed. But there's something I didn't include in the report, something I noticed later. When I reviewed the camera footage again, at exactly 2:17 a.m., right when the first log appeared, there was a single frame. One frame, where Terminal 3 was already on, before it turned on in real time, before I walked over, before anything should have been active. And in that frame, the chair wasn't empty. It wasn't clear, not detailed, just not empty. I reported everything else, but not that, because I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to. The final log entry still bothers me the most. 2:27 a.m. Session remains active. No source, no terminal, no user, just that line. They called it a logging error. But I've worked with that system long enough to know it doesn't generate entries on its own. Something has to be there to create a log. And whatever was there that night was already inside, not connected, not entering, already present. I don't work night shifts anymore. Not because I'm afraid, but because sometimes when I look at inactive systems, I get the feeling they're still running something I can't see. And whatever adapted that night didn't leave. It just stopped needing to show itself. Story 2. The location she sent wasn't a real address. At 8:43 p.m., I turned into an empty parking lot where a restaurant was supposed to be. My headlights swept across cracked asphalt, a row of loading docks, and a dark warehouse with boarded windows. There was no sign, no cars, no building that looked even partially open. My phone vibrated in my hand. "I'm here," she wrote. "I see you." I read the message twice before looking up again. The pin she had sent earlier that afternoon dropped exactly where I was parked. Same coordinates, same name attached to it. A small Italian place I'd never heard of, but didn't question. It had reviews, photos, nothing strange. The lot was silent, no music, no other headlights, just the faint hum of my engine and the ticking sound as I shifted into park. "I think this is the wrong spot," I typed. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "No, you're in the right place." A second message followed. "You just pulled into the 3rd row near the light pole." I looked up at the light pole. It flickered slightly at the top, casting a weak orange circle onto the pavement. I hadn't seen anyone. The warehouse to my right was dark. The street behind me was empty. I stepped out of the car slowly. The air felt colder than it had when I left my apartment. Not freezing, just sharp. The kind of cold that makes small sounds travel farther. "I don't see you," I sent. "You're wearing a dark jacket. Gray shoes." I glanced down at myself. It wasn't hard to guess clothing colors, but the detail about the shoes made my chest tighten. They were worn gray sneakers, slightly scuffed at the toes, not noticeable from far away. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the lot. "Where are you?" I asked. A pause. "Closer than you think." I didn't like that answer. The warehouse had 2 levels of narrow windows along the side facing me, all dark. The only other place someone could be was behind the line of dumpsters near the loading dock, or inside a parked vehicle I couldn't see. My phone buzzed again. "You're looking toward the building now?" I stopped moving. The timing was exact, not delayed, not vague. My pulse sped up, but I kept my breathing steady. I didn't want to overreact. There were logical possibilities. Maybe she was across the street. Maybe she was in an apartment overlooking the lot. Maybe she was joking, trying to be playful. "I think this might be a prank," I typed. "I'm not joking." Another message followed. "You just checked over your left shoulder." I got back in the car. I didn't slam the door. I didn't rush. I just got in and locked it quietly. The interior felt safer, even though I knew it didn't really change anything. "Okay," I wrote. "If you're here, wave." There was no response for nearly 30 seconds. Then, "You're in the blue sedan. You just locked it." I hadn't told her what car I drove. My profile didn't mention it. We hadn't talked about vehicles at all. I started the engine. She texted again before I could shift into drive. "Why are you leaving?" That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not panic, not even fear exactly. Just a quiet decision. "I don't see a restaurant," I replied. "I don't see you." "I'm here." "Then come to my car." Another pause. "No." The warehouse sat unmoving in my rearview mirror. The lot remained empty. "You're overreacting," she wrote. "It's just a misunderstanding." I put the car in reverse. "Wait," she sent immediately. "Don't." The urgency in that single word felt different from her earlier messages. Less controlled. I backed out of the space and drove toward the exit slowly, headlights sweeping across the warehouse wall one last time. "Why won't you just look up?" she wrote. I didn't respond. I turned onto the main road and kept driving until the warehouse disappeared behind a row of closed storefronts. My phone buzzed 3 more times, but I didn't check it until I was 5 minutes away, stopped at a red light. "You didn't have to leave." "I was right there." "You didn't even try to find me." I typed one question. "Where were you standing?" The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Near the entrance." There was no entrance. She didn't reply to that. I drove home in silence, the radio off. The whole thing felt unreal in a quiet way. Not dramatic, just wrong. Like a conversation slightly out of sync. When I got home, I parked on the street instead of in my usual garage spot. I'm not sure why. Habit felt unreliable. Inside my apartment, I replayed the evening carefully. She had suggested the place. She had sent the location. She had said she could see me. She had described my movements accurately. I opened our chat and scrolled up to earlier messages. We had talked for 3 days. Normal things, work schedules, favorite food. She had seemed specific enough about her own life, a marketing job, a roommate, a dog named Clover. Nothing dramatic. I searched the restaurant name online again. This time, nothing came up. No reviews, no photos, no listing. The pin she had sent still existed in our message thread, but when I tapped it, it opened to a blank location label. Just coordinates. I went cold for a moment. I checked the app. Her profile was still active. Same pictures, same bio. I opened her photos carefully, looking for reflections, background clues, anything that suggested proximity to that warehouse. Nothing obvious. Then I noticed something small I hadn't paid attention to before. In one of her photos, taken at night, there was a faint orange glow in the background. A tall light pole, industrial looking, the kind you see in large lots. It could have been anywhere. I told myself that. My phone buzzed again. "I didn't mean to scare you," she wrote. "I'm not scared," I replied. "That's good." A pause. "You drive carefully." I stared at that message longer than the others. "How would you know what I drive?" I asked. No typing bubble appeared this time. Minutes passed. I checked her profile again. Still there. I went into my camera roll and zoomed in on the photo from earlier that evening. A quick picture I had taken of the warehouse sign when I first arrived, intending to send it to her as proof the restaurant wasn't there. In the corner of the image, barely visible near the second-floor window, there was a shape behind the glass. Not a clear figure, just a darker outline against the dark interior. Vertical, still. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. It could have been anything. A reflection, a pipe, a trick of shadow, but the angle matched exactly where my headlights had swept when I first pulled in. And she had said, "You just pulled into the third row, near the light pole," less than 10 seconds after I parked. I set my phone down and looked toward my own window. For the first time since I got home, I realized something simple and precise. She never once asked what car I drove. Not before we agreed to meet. Not while I was there. Not after I left. And she had still known which one was mine. Story 3. Her profile didn't exist the next morning. At 7:12 a.m., I reached for my phone to reread the message she'd sent the night before. The app refreshed once. Our conversation vanished. Her name was gone. Her photos were gone. It was as if the last 5 days hadn't happened. At 11:38 p.m., she had texted, "I had a really good time tonight." I remember the time because I checked the microwave clock when the notification came in. I smiled. The date had felt normal. Not great, not bad, just slightly off. We met at a wine bar downtown at 8 p.m. She arrived on time. Navy sweater, hair pulled back. She looked like her photos, just quieter in person. Her voice was softer than I expected. We talked for 2 hours. She said she worked in consulting. "What kind?" I asked. A small pause. "Operations stuff." Later, she mentioned relocating recently for a new role. When I asked where she moved from, she said Chicago. I'm almost certain earlier she'd said Denver. Not confidently, just enough to register. When the bill came, she insisted on splitting it exactly. Outside, she hugged me lightly and said she'd like to see me again. At 11:38 p.m., she confirmed that. At 7:12 a.m., she no longer existed on the app. I assumed she unmatched me. It happens. But when I searched her name manually, nothing. No profile, no trace. Even our message thread had disappeared. She'd given me her number in case the app glitches. When I called that afternoon, it didn't ring. Just an automated tone, then disconnection. I checked Instagram. Nothing. Variations of her name. Nothing. It felt excessive to keep looking, so I stopped. 2 weeks passed. Then, one Tuesday at 10:30 p.m., I was swiping absent-mindedly when I saw her face again. Same smile, same slight tilt of the head. But the name was different. Not Lauren. Maya. The bio was identical. Recently relocated. Love quiet wine bars and early morning walks. The city listed wasn't mine. It was 2 states away. I opened the profile carefully. 2 photos were the same, the navy sweater and the lake picture. A third was new. The prompts were identical. Same wording, same punctuation. In her original profile, she'd answered 2 truths and a lie. One truth was that she broke her wrist falling off a rental scooter. She'd shown me the faint scar on her left wrist during the date. This profile had the same story. I closed the app, then reopened it. The profile was still there. This time I swiped right. We matched within minutes. No delay. I stared at the chat box before typing, "Hey, you look familiar." The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. "I get that a lot." Her tone felt polished, controlled. "Have you ever lived in my city?" I asked. Longer pause. "No, I've only ever lived here." Here, meaning the city 2 states away. "I could have sworn I saw you at a wine bar downtown a few weeks ago." "I don't really drink wine," she replied. She had ordered a Cabernet. I remember because she asked which one was driest. I kept my tone even. "You've never been to bar name?" "No." No hesitation, just certainty. I shifted. "What kind of consulting do you do?" "Operation stuff." Exact phrasing. "You ever break your wrist?" I asked. "I've never broken a bone." I stopped messaging after that. Not because I was scared, because I didn't know what question made sense anymore. Over the next few days, I checked her profile occasionally. It stayed active. The distance marker shifted slightly, as if she were moving around that other city. Then one morning, it disappeared again. Not unmatched. Gone. 3 weeks later, she appeared again. Different name, new city, same bio. The profile picture was cropped differently, but it was undeniably her. This time, I didn't swipe. I just looked more carefully. In each version of her profile, the age shifted by a year or 2. Subtle. Plausible. The cities changed every time, large enough to blend in, far enough to avoid overlap. She wasn't hiding. She was resetting. Meeting someone under one name. Leaving before questions formed. Reappearing somewhere else with minor adjustments. Not disappearing completely. Just starting over. The last time I saw her profile, one line had changed. Recently relocated. Love quiet wine bars and early morning walks. Looking for something steady. Steady. That word hadn't been there before. I closed the app and didn't reopen it for months. Because what unsettled me wasn't that she lied. It was how cleanly she erased herself. How easily she stepped back into the same outline somewhere else. As if none of it ever happened. As if I had imagined the entire evening. And somewhere in some other city, at exactly 8 p.m., she's probably sitting across from someone new. Same stories, slight adjustments. Watching for the moment their memory starts to conflict with what she's saying. The inconsistencies weren't mistakes. They were rehearsals. If you enjoy slow, unsettling horror stories, consider liking the video and subscribing.